forward.
Yes.
Okay. So now we are recording. So this is week 5 of It's Your Money, Caregiving, Care. Let me read the title here. Medical Care Planning and Caregiving. The good news is it's you guys talking. As we've done before, I'm going to ask that you keep your video off so we can continue with the recording and keep you muted as we go along. Again, up in the upper right-hand corner, if you're on a PC, I was corrected the other day that any of iPads or other things don't work this way. You can control some of the other, how these things look. As before, if you want, you can see down below where it says chat, and we want you to give us information or questions. So chat box will come up, and if you click on it, it will send it to me. I'm going to review those questions as we go along and feed them to Pete and Leanne. Again, as before, the website for itsyourmoneyandestate.org. You can go to workshops and pick which one. It's Your Money in this case. Pick which week you want, and in there are various articles, the handout material, and a few days after we do this, there should be a video, unless we've messed it up again. They may be somewhere in there. They could be farther down. They could be in the top. Don't know where they're going to be, but that's where you can go through and look at the video and see what we just did. So that's where we're going. We are currently in week 5. Next week will be fixed income, looking at bonds, and then we'll go on from there. So let me stop sharing this. And Pete is going to give us a bit of a wrap up or summary of where we are.
We lost the outline, or at least I don't see the.
I turned it off. It's you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Do you want to remember what the class was? Here.
Yeah. Where are we? Cognitive issues.
Yeah, we'll discuss that later. There you go.
There we go. Okay, just a brief review where we've been. We did the quiz and our test. We talked about the sale of financial products, and that's what the industry is about. We did the how financial advisory services ought to be handled through a financial planning process, no matter how much money or net worth you have. Last week, we talked about in the investment area and asset allocation, diversification. We have medical care planning today, and the reason why we have this is for 2 reasons. One is it could be the most costly expenditure during your lifetime. And so financially, you need to be ready for it. And the entire medical industry is changing. So that's number 1 reason. Number 2 reason is that nobody likes to talk about death and dying except me. So I really like it because it makes me that much more conscious about living and how important decisions are and how important things that seem to be important may not be that important. And it was the medical issues for my father that started this whole workshop series. So he was intubated for over a little bit over 6 weeks, and as a family it was absolutely horrid. And the reason for the 6 weeks is that we as a family couldn't agree on things. And also we didn't have any of the discussions prior to this, and we didn't know what my father's wishes were, and we didn't have the legal documentation in place. So I don't want this to happen to any other family. And I think the onset of this virus that we have today, we'll talk a little bit about ventilators and medical care. So, and we've got a special guest speaker with Leanne. She's a registered nurse, and let's introduce her first so we can get started.
Go for it.
You want to bring up the?
I will. Oh, it's going to be on the next page.
Okay.
So
that's the session today, medical care planning. As we do all of our presenters, we go through the Ask First form, and it's just basic information. So first thing you see on her form is that Leanne has 25 years of nursing experience. Talk a little bit about that, Leanne, what your experience has been.
Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon. I started off as a nurse in British Columbia, Canada, and for the first many years of my experience as a new nurse, I worked in the medical surgical field. After a little bit of time doing that, I moved to the States and had different clinical settings: hematology, oncology, radiation oncology, hospice work. Most recently, over the last 7 years, I've run my own company, which is a care management company. There's 5 nurses in this company, as well as a couple of people who do more the administrative side of what we do. But that's currently what I do. So my background is varied, but I appreciate what Pete says about talking about death and dying, and I think it's such an important thing. I've worked with families over the years from acute care settings all the way through to hospice end of life. And I think that one of the greatest gifts you can give your family, and to give yourself actually too, is to have these kind of conversations that we're going to talk about today. Get your paperwork in order. Make sure that your family, your loved ones, understand what it is that you want for your end of life. So I'm really pleased to talk about end of life at any time. So I appreciate being here today.
Talk a little bit about the geriatric care management area, because what you do now as an individual, not working for a specific hospital and having your own firm, it wasn't around 20 years ago.
Right, right. So you may hear, and Pete, do you want to finish this form, or do you want me to go into what's coming up on the slides to come?
Why don't you go into it right now, is to talk a little bit about it. And then when we get to the slide, you could just emphasize the more important stuff that you want.
I think I'm going to remember what's on my slides. You're very, very confident.
Okay, we could do it either way.
Why don't we go ahead and talk about the form first?
Yeah, okay. Let's go right down to, you're a registered nurse, you're licensed. Is there a way to check up on your license, Leanne?
Yes, that's a good question, Pete. If you go to the Board of Registered Nursing, and this applies for whether it's licensed vocational nurses or respiratory therapists, you can always go to the board and do a search. So you can go to the Board of Registered Nursing, and in my case, being a nurse, you can go to the board and do a search and just make sure that that person has a valid license that is active, and it will tell you if there is disciplinary action as well against that license number.
Please always check. She does not practice law. She puts her client's interest first, and you don't look like Mother Teresa, Leanne. Oh. I know this comes as a shock, but how are you paid?
I'm paid differently than Mother Teresa was. So we are a private company. We don't receive reimbursement through any kind of insurance, Medicare, private commercial insurance. We don't receive any kind of funds through them. We are 100% out of pocket. So we charge on an hourly basis. Our rate is $180 an hour, and we bill by, the minutes that we work on a client's case. But yes, we don't have any insurance coverage.
Okay. Hopefully that will change in the near future.
I think it needs to.
Yeah, you're invaluable. You don't sell any annuities, insurance, or mutual funds, or affiliated with somebody who does?
Nope.
Okay, and then she swears on the penalty of perjury. That's correct. Let's go to the next slide.
All right. So this is the area that Pete was just referencing about care management. So care management is a term that can be very confusing. And if we were live, I would ask you people if you've heard of what the term care manager, if you've heard the term before. Many people have not, or the people who have are confused about what it actually means. So I'm going to try and clarify that just a little bit for you today, because it is a term that you're going to hear more and more of over the years to come. A care manager, it's worth asking a lot of questions. When someone says, I'm a care manager or I do care management, it is time to dust off some really good questions to ask them. The people who call themselves care managers or even case managers, you might hear the term senior advocate, you might hear the term navigator. There's a lot of different terminology that's kind of wrapped into this care management world. These people tend to have different qualifications. They have different education, experience, backgrounds. Some people are nurses. Some people are social workers. Some people are gerontologists. Some people are you name it, and they call themselves care managers. You might also hear the term case manager, which is a little bit different, but you'll hear that as well. But basically, if you're talking about a professional care manager, it's someone that is really focused on managing and helping someone to manage all the different kinds of conditions in their lives, to be able to function at maximal well-being and to maximize their function as well as their overall well-being and quality of life. As I mentioned, in terms of backgrounds, you may have people that you can keep on going there, Don. Maybe just put all of them up. As I mentioned, they may be different kinds of backgrounds in terms of their education and experience, but most of them will have some experience in education in the area of aging. As you can well imagine, when we age, there's a lot of different things to think about. It's in addition to our regular concerns about our health, our financial health, our legal situation. When we get to be in the older years, we're talking about considerations like, how am I going to live alone? Can I live alone? If I'm going to live alone, who's going to help me to do so, and how can I do that most safely? So a lot of people who are care managers are focusing on people who are in the older years, the elderly, but you may also have care managers who deal with people who have disabilities, or perhaps they have very serious illness, but they're on the younger side of age. We have, I think our youngest client is 72, so not really, really young, but we've also had referrals for kids. And you may find some care managers out there who specialize in those areas. These are care managers are usually people who are very well versed in community resources and connecting their clients to the proper resources in the community. That's a really important element of what care managers do. Care managers, I can attest to this, every day you are problem solving from the moment your eyeballs open till the moment you go to bed at night. It is definitely a role of solving issues as they arrive, resolving issues related to medical, related to family dynamics. It's a lot of problem solving. So you also want to focus on not just the current problems, but what do you anticipate in the future? We know that if someone is declining from a physical point of view, from a cognitive point of view, there are things that we can do proactively, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment here. The view that care managers should have of a client is a holistic view. So we're talking about physical, emotional, mental, cognitive, all those things need to be part of the care plan when you're talking about care management. So it's very much a holistic focus, and it's a proactive focus. One of the roles that care managers have is to coordinate services. So making sure that services like providers, your primary care physician, maybe there's a neurologist, there's an oncologist for a recent onset of a cancer diagnosis. There's also, as we'll talk about a lot today, there'll be maybe a caregiving service, a home care company. Maybe there's therapists involved. So all these people need to be coordinated, and a care manager will help to coordinate those kinds of care and services. A care manager is also a liaison and helps to keep people on the same page. So when you get to be elderly, there's a lot of different providers in your world. There's the medical, there's social, there's non-medical people like the home care companies that are involved. And we want to make sure that all of those people are on the same page, that it's coordinated delivery of care. When it's not, it can be pretty messy. So all the way down, for an example, delivering oxygen to a home, or making sure that you have orders for the oxygen to be delivered at the home. Oxygen is considered to be a medication, so you have to get orders from the doctor. So there's lots of things to tie together when you're a care manager. Other activities that care managers do, very much promoting health and trying to prevent illness. We spend a lot of time and energy trying to prevent our folks from ending up in the emergency room. That is one of the things that we really focus a lot on. 90% of our clients live in their private home, so they want to stay there. They don't want to be bopping back and forth to the ER. They want to have things in place that will prevent them from having to have that acute experience of going to the ER or an urgent care even.
Leanne, let me stop you for just a minute. I seem to have gotten out of whack of where we are. So let me redo this. Hang on just a minute.
I have on the screen where she is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. You've got we're on.
That's better.
Okay, here we go.
All right. Okay, so just in terms of just to help you to find an area that might be useful to you, if you are looking for a care manager, There is an association. This is an association that's actually been around since the 80s. Back then it was called the National Association for Geriatric Care Managers. They have since rebranded, realizing that this is not just for people who are aging, it's also for people of different points in their life. They might be younger, things like that, as I mentioned earlier. So the Aging Life Care Association is an association for professional care managers. This is a place to go and to check and see if the person you just met at the recent networking event is actually a true professional care manager. You can go onto this website. You can also search by zip code to see if there's someone in your area that might be able to help you. On that website, they will tell you whether the person is a nurse, whether they're a gerontologist, social worker, etc., what areas they specialize in. In terms of our company at RN Health Management, we are, because we're nurses and that is our specialty, we do focus on people who are more medically complex, have a lot of issues related to just their chronic conditions. As I mentioned, most of our clients are elderly, so they have multiple chronic conditions and they're trying like heck to stay in their own homes and age in place. But again, this website will tell you the background of those different people. So it's a very useful website. It also tells you things like what is a care manager. And so it's a very useful place to go and find some information.
Well, before we go into the next slide, I want everyone to understand who needs to know this stuff. You know, you think you do, but you really don't, because if you are needing this kind of service, you're more than likely not in the best of health. And so the person who needs to know this is your agent for your advanced health care. And we'll get to that and we'll talk a little bit about it. But just keep in mind that all the Leanne and the services that she offers needs to be told to your advanced healthcare agent. I use Leanne in my business as a fiduciary. When somebody names me to be their healthcare agent and I need to make medical decisions on their behalf, I'm not in the medical field. And not only that, medical doctors are very difficult to talk to sometimes. The average doctor has primary care practice that's 3,000 patients. So they can't give you the personal care and explain things to you as to what is best for you. And so I rely on Leanne and people in her field to help me make medical decisions for my clients. Let's go on. There's a bunch of terms that we need to know for sure, and especially in this change environment that we're having in the medical industry. And it is an industry, lots of money in it, and a lot of decisions are based on money. What is the definition of acute care, Leanne?
So this usually is the time that you have an acute issue. Maybe there's been a fall, maybe there's an exacerbation of a pulmonary issue. You need to have acute care. You need it now. You need to end up in some place like a hospital where they can provide you with the services, the medication, the treatments that you need to resolve an acute issue. We know that— Are
you going to be admitted to the hospital if you go to the emergency room if you don't need acute care?
Right. So as probably many of you have experienced possibly with yourself or a loved one, if they don't believe you need to be there, they're not going to admit you. I think that this has been a big change over the last few years, that if you do not meet the criteria to stay even one night, you're going to be on your way home. So there used to be a time where they used to observe you, and now those times are less and less. They still do keep people on observation many times. And I think the acute care hospital is a wonderful place to be if you really need it, really, really need it. But if you don't, there are other ways to manage this at home these days.
And when you go into a hospital, does your primary care physician, are they in charge of you?
No, so the hospitalist is the person who will be following you during your admission there. This is someone who likely has no clue who you are, doesn't really know your background, your desires, etc. They have a very large panel of patients to see when they're in the hospital like that. So this is someone that normally has no clue who you are.
And so therefore, it's really important for you to have, again, your advocate, your agent for your health care, to be able to explain to the ER or to the hospitalist as to what is going on with you. Because they won't have any clue as to what drugs you're on or what you're allergic to, or they don't know anything about you. They're there to keep you breathing and whatever the acute problem is to resolve it.
Right.
What is skilled care?
Can I just say one thing about the acute care before we go on? Just as a little tip for everybody, for each of our clients, when we first get brought into a case, we create what's called an emergency folder. And in that folder, you have a list of your most current medications. You have a list of the relationships you have, the providers that you have, the pulmonologist, the neurologist, the whatever ologist you have. You have a copy of your advanced healthcare directive. If you have a pulse, there's a copy of that in there. All the things that they would need to know right off the bat. I think that that is something that everybody should have for themselves, that emergency packet that goes with you or your loved one, and that gives the providers a lot of information right off the bat. Skilled care, so if we've done the acute piece, usually what happens is if someone's been in the acute care hospital, they are doing better, they don't meet the criteria to stay on the floor anymore, so they're going to get transferred over to skilled care in some cases. And this is a facility that will allow that person to be able to gain some more strength through the therapies that they have there. They'll have physical therapy, occupational therapy, respiratory therapy, if that's appropriate for them. They'll receive all their therapies there, their treatments, maybe there's wounds to be tended to. Those will be treated at the facility. So this is where you have skilled care, and you may stay there for a month, 2 months, 3 months before you head back home again.
Let's back up just a second. The acute care of the hospital today, you're not going to see a lot of people in there. Whereas the skilled care facilities are packed. Mm-hmm. Who pays for everything? So when you're in the hospital, you're either going to be on Medicare or some HMO. And if you're on Medicare alone, then you need to be in the hospital 3 days plus 1 in order to get 20 days of Medicare paid skilled care.
Right.
So
right.
Those dates are important. If you're in an HMO or have an Advantage plan, then there's not a problem. You could stay longer until you're cured or rehabilitated. But Medicare pays for 20 days fully and then 80 days on a partial basis. So, and when you enter into the hospital, you are assigned a discharge nurse almost immediately. Okay, so it's, if you ever gone to a mechanic and they open up the engine to see what's wrong, and then they open up the book and they go to a carburetor and they go, okay, carburetor fix is 3 hours and our hourly rate is blah, 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 and that's the charge. Hospitals are almost exactly the same way. Depending on the diagnosis, they go open up the book and Medicare pays the hospital based on the diagnosis. So if they can get you out of the hospital sooner than what the diagnosis normally pays for, they gain revenue. Mm-hmm. You know, but the goal is for them, and for multiple reasons, financially as well, is to get you out of the hospital as soon as possible. And probably germ-wise, it'd probably be a good thing for you to get out of there as well. But there are financial issues involved and you need to be aware of them. Skilled care, what I usually hear, Leanne, I'll be right there with you. On skilled care, what I usually hear, because I am an agent for their health care, around the 18th, 19th day, I hear, your mother or father is really doing well. Well, you know, and I go, I don't see a difference. No, they want you out after 20 days because now they're going to have to rely on the patient to pay the skilled care facility. Now, Leanne, when you go into a skilled care facility, is your primary care physician in charge of you?
They usually have their own what's called a SNFist, so it's the skilled nursing facility doctors that round at those kinds of facilities. And again, it's not someone who knows you. It's not someone who knows your ins and outs. And they'll take a look at your chart, they'll review your diagnoses, but they truly don't know you.
They don't.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the medical director is the owner of the facility. Mm-hmm. And so what I usually ask the discharge nurse is that what skilled care facility would you send your mother or father to with this type of a situation? You make it personal, okay? After you're out of the rehab and you got custodial care, what does that mean?
These are the care needs that someone has just to function on a day-to-day basis. It's the things that you and I tend to take for granted, the bathing, the grooming, the eating, the transferring, the toileting, all those things that we
have a slide on that, Don? Is there a next slide?
Don? Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Wake up.
So those...
Forget to push the button that I can speak.
Going to the next slide.
Oh, what is Medicare? Oh, maybe we need the next slide.
Yeah, the one that lists the ADLs.
Our order wasn't very good on this, Pete.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Okay, well,
can you go a little bit further, Don? Sorry.
The ADL stands for Activities of Daily Living. And they seem really common and kind of intuitive, but the ADLs are important because of the fact that insurance contracts use it. You have to have, there they are, you have to have 3 out of the 6 that are listed in order for your long-term care insurance to kick in. ADLs are used by the care facility to release you back home. So this is the language that is used, and that's why they're really important. Now, if you are suffering from, and I'm going to use my males because we're much more egotistical and we don't always like to admit that we have problems. So if we are a patient and we have trouble bathing or dressing or toileting, we're not saying, hey, I have these 3 ADLs that I have problems with. And so what happens, Leanne, how does that work? Does somebody examine you, or?
You talking about in terms of the long-term care insurance part?
Yeah, or long-term care insurance, or anyone. I mean, in other words, when you examine someone, do you use these things in your report to that the person has trouble bathing, dressing, toileting, continence, etc.?
Right. So if someone is maybe, as an example, applying for their long-term care insurance, they will send a nurse out to evaluate you or your loved one to see what kinds of abilities, functional abilities, that person has. So are they able to transfer themselves out of the bed or from a wheelchair to the bed? Are they able to be continent of, bladder, bowel? Are they able to dress themselves, groom themselves? So that is evaluated. And certainly we don't want someone who's not able to perform activities of daily living to be living by themselves. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who do. So there are options to have people come and assist with this. Many people will use a loved one to be able to help to manage these kinds of activities of daily living. Other people will hire in home care providers. Some people will use a private home care company. I'm sorry, not a private home care company, a private caregiver. Others will use a home care company. But the largest bulk of work that these providers do is related to the activities of daily living, just being able to help people get through their day.
Why is this really important for women to know?
Well, being the stronger sex, we do live longer than males do. So there are some stats out there that I can't remember off the top of my head, but women obviously are living longer than men do on average. So they also are more vulnerable from a financial point of view. These are, factual things, that they are more vulnerable from a financial point of view. So they get into their older years, the spouse passes away. The older the woman gets, the greater the chances they'll live a few more years. So you could be 85 and you may live another 5, 8 years after that. And that's a long time to be supporting yourself in terms of being able to care. We know that as people age, their ability to take care of their activities of daily living decreases. So for women who are living longer and longer, it's a real issue. It's a real challenge.
And it's usually the woman who takes care of the husband,
right?
To help him bathe, to help him dress, to help him toilet. To help them transfer. And what happens so many times is that she dies before he does, right? Because the stress and the strain it is to care for somebody. It is, unless you've been through it, you don't know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And so if you're the one that's caring for another individual, make sure you're nice to yourself. Make sure you have respite. What is respite? It's so important, and most people don't know what it is.
Right. So if you have a respite benefit that you can take advantage of, it is a wonderful thing to do. So it basically is like a mini break. Some respite programs involve placing the loved one maybe in a facility, a skilled nursing, or even an assisted living. Sometimes they have beds available that you can place your loved one there for a certain number of days. It's usually 5 days maximum. There's even a hospice even has a respite benefit that you can take advantage of if you have a loved one that's on end-of-life care with hospice. So it's just an opportunity for caregivers to have a break and to take a breath and to take care of themselves a little bit more for a few days at a time.
And I see very rare that women do it.
Yep.
And because and they don't realize what a stress and strain it is until after the death of the spouse, and they literally need 2 to 3 years almost just to recover.
Right.
So let's go back to the, I don't know where we are on the slide.
No, I'm going to ask a question. So the question came in of, does Medicare Supplement Plan G cover the 20 days of skilled care and 80 days of partial care?
From my know-how, and it's not extensive because you have to look at each individual contract. If you have a PPO, then most of them will take care of everything beyond the 20 days. Okay. If you don't have a PPO, then you got to look at your HMO contract to see what it says. So there is no one blanket rule except for the first 20 days Medicare pays for it, or your HMO will pay for it.
I think too, if we were to talk about a resource that might be helpful is, and I don't know where it is on the slide anymore, but with the Medicare program with the Council on Aging.
They're wonderful.
They are amazing. That's a wonderful.
I think you had the slide up a little bit ago, Don. I saw it pass by.
We did pass it by. You're right.
Yeah.
But this is an organization that is very neutral. They have no skin in the game. I think actually the one you just went by, Don, was it?
Okay, we'll keep going.
Okay. But they have no, they're there. Okay.
There we go.
Health insurance counseling and advocacy program through the Council on Aging. They will, on the phone, these days especially, just call in and ask a question about your Medicare, and they can help you walk through that. They're also good if you're thinking of making a change to your insurance coverage. Maybe you're thinking of switching up your chosen program. They can help you walk through that. They used to have in-person groups that they would walk through Medicare, what it means, what it covers, et cetera. And these days they're not doing that, obviously, but they will be available by phone to call in and ask all your Medicare-related questions.
Wonderful resource.
Yeah, amazing.
Again, for your agent, for your health care.
Free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They get funded through fines that insurance companies have to pay.
Mm.
Let's
That's
go. Oh, one other thing that we don't see on that ADL slide that is cognitive issues. And so many a time people have trouble with their ADLs because of cognition. So it's involved in each one of these, but dementia is a whole separate issue. The good news is that it's still a minority of us that will ever be demented. So I know when you listen to the news sometimes and you hear stories, you would think that all of us will end up demented, but that's not the case. Where are we?
I think we're doing long-term care insurance, Pete.
Let's do, is it slide 11? You know, people think that long-term care or help with your ADLs are just for old people. And you kind of mentioned that, Leanne. It could happen as a child. We had a 12-year-old that was physically abused and was going to need medical care for the rest of their lives. It could happen in an adult. You could have a stroke or a heart attack, and you're going to need care. And of course, also as an older adult, and there's so many myths about death and how we age and our memory loss. If you're at all confused, you know, read some of the literature. It's, you know, our cognition doesn't decline rapidly as we age. It goes down slightly, but, you know, not that much. And if we stay curious and involved, you know, our death is like falling off a cliff. However, medical science can keep you alive for a long, long time. You know, the heart is a mechanical almost instrument. Bones can be replaced. And so you've got to focus on your quality of life. And are we going to get into the next slide as to the agent for the healthcare?
We can only guess.
I think we have long-term care before then.
Okay.
We're working on it.
We're getting there, Pete.
Okay. So how do you pay for care? This is where the financial planning comes in. It's a highly emotional issue. And so, you know, check it out. Self-insure. What is your net worth? What's your cash flow like? How about your emotional and physical health? And what is the cost going to be? Caregiving costs today, if you needed 24/7 just general care, it could range between $200,000 to $400,000 a year. Average on a national level is, if you're 85 and older, is 3 years or less. All of these are just averages. So you need, as you get older and you're concerned about this, you need to make sure that you have some liquidity. So do you have $300,000 to $500,000 in liquid assets? And here, reverse mortgage may come into play if you need to tap into your home. Only problem there is if you need to move into a board and care, you can't keep your home. So it takes some planning if you're going to self-insure. Most of us are going to die before we need long-term care. That's my hope. possibly you can live with your children. You know, I told my mother this. I said, you know, we've got a kind of a granny flat and you can live with us and there'd be no problem. And she said, I'd rather die than live with you. So she decided to live with my older sister, which really worked out well. And we built a little kind of a separate room for her. And so she had, as you want to have as much independence as possible. You could transfer the cost to the insurance company, and that is, you know, your long-term care contracts. Long-term care contracts today are so expensive. And so it's almost like if you have enough money to pay for a long-term care contract, you might as well not have it. And if you can't afford to have a long-term care contract, it's totally understandable. Medicare, Medi-Cal is still there today. And there's so many, again, the perception of what Medi-Cal is about out there, you need to really kind of understand it. You don't have to be impoverished to have Medi-Cal. And in every other state except California, it's called Medicaid. So Medi-Cal is here in California because it pays more than any other state in the country. So, and again, the Council on Aging is excellent. We'll go through it a little bit more later on in the slides. Let's go to the next one. If you're going to look at a long-term care contract, or you have one, determine what your premium amount is, how much do you have to pay on a monthly basis. Your indemnity policy, what that means is that caregiving cost and all those costs are on a daily rate. So, and insurance contracts pay on a daily rate. So you can get coverage for $100 a day, $300 a day, $500 a day. The higher your indemnity policy is, of course, your premiums are going to go up. If you want inflation protection, your premiums are going to go up. Some policies have, hey, you've got $1 million to spend. Once you're done with the $1 million, that's it. Comprehensive policies includes residential care, home care, respite care, all of those. I would not purchase a long-term care contract just for residential care or just for home care. Who knows where you're going to be in the future and what is best for you. Quack, quack. What does that remind you of?
Aflac.
Aflac, exactly. And they sell more specific disease policies than any other insurance company. Avoid them. Who knows? You want a policy that no matter what you die of, you're covered, not from just one specific disease. And it better be on your death certificate that you died from that disease in order for the insurance company to cover you. If you like the duck, you like Aflac, become a stockholder. Determine the financial health of an insurance company. It is almost impossible. You can ask for their Standard & Poor's or ask the health commissioner here in the state of California, but it's very difficult to determine the financial health. Stay with the large ones, Allstate, Genworth. This is not, if you're going to purchase one of these policies, this is not the time to go on a second or third tier. Who will file the claim? If you have dementia, you're not going to remember if you have long-term care insurance. So whoever is your agent for your health care, make sure that they know that you have the policy and how to qualify for that policy. So they'll send out a nurse and they'll say, some policies say, hey, you have to have 4 ADLs. Some policies indicate that you have to have 3 ADLs. Well, you better understand that your agent for your healthcare understands what ADL means, first of all, that you have a healthcare policy, and they know who to call if it's needed. Age limit or pre-existing conditions, many policies have this, but they'll say, hey, we'll exclude if you die or you need long-term care or custodial care because of a heart attack, and you had a heart attack previously and you die within those 6 months, then they won't cover you. So you have to be in good health in order usually to get the policy. Like all insurance policies, they're very, very difficult to understand, and they're not in your favor. So you have 30 days to rescind once you sign an insurance contract. And this is where I would really go to HICAP, which is the Council on Aging program, and they'll sit down with you, or you'll scan them the contract. They will review the contract with you so that you understand what you have signed. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide.
But that slide.
Yeah, there you go. This is called the partnership policy. It was designed so that individuals would not all go on Medi-Cal, and that you didn't have to impoverish yourself. I think only Genworth is still available as a partnership. It's expensive, but if I were to buy a policy today, I would buy a California partnership policy. We're not going to spend too much time on it. Let's move on to the next slide. If you're looking at a policy, I would look at it today from a catastrophic point of view. And what I mean by that is that use your own money to begin with. And then let's say, hey, if I use my money for a year or two, my own money, what would it cost me if the long-term care policy kicks in after a year or after 2 years? So it's called an elimination period. The longer that elimination period is, the less likely you're going to need the coverage. Therefore, your premiums are going to be substantially lower. So I had an individual who was 90 years old and got a policy. And she said, hey, I've got enough money to last me for the next 5 years. And then at 95, I want the policy to kick in. And it was at a reasonable cost because the likelihood of her living that long was low. Everything is based on age. Today, if I was in my 50s, I would get what's called today a hybrid policy. That is an insurance policy, like a life insurance policy, that has what's called a rider that accumulates over time to pay for long-term care. And the older you are, and combined with the elimination period, is going to, again, determine the cost. Many of the long-term care contracts state in the contract that they're not going to increase the premium during the life of the contract, during your lifetime. That's a bunch of bullpucky. They go to the Department of Insurance. They say, hey, we can't stay solvent unless we increase everybody's premiums. And consequently, about 40% of individuals who purchase a long-term care contract end up tossing it after about 8 years. Length of coverage, again, you could do by years, you could do by lifetime, you could do by dollar amount. 3 years, again, is about average in the country. I think you need to figure out for yourself what you may need. Let's see. Long-term care contracts provides custodial care, and that is also Medi-Cal. In other words, somebody to help you bathe, somebody to make sure you eat, somebody to transfer, toileting, continence, etc. It does not cover skilled care. You can have, we're in Laguna Beach, you can have a $5 million home and still qualify for Medi-Cal. You can own a Lamborghini and you can still qualify for Medi-Cal. So it's based on assets outside of your home, your vehicle, and your burial plan, and you can have up to $1,500 in cash. There are professionals out there, I hate to call them even professionals, scam artists out there that put together workshops to get you Medi-Cal qualified. And what it means is that you transfer all of your assets to your children and then purchase an annuity and quote unquote, so that you can now go on Medi-Cal. Please try to avoid that. There are legitimate ways to go about making sure that you're not overpaying or underpaying in your Medi-Cal planning. And you should go to an attorney who is called an elder law attorney. It's almost its complete specialty. But elder law is the key words to use if you're dealing with Medi-Cal or any kind of government benefit program. Those are the kind of attorneys that you need, and try to avoid the insurance part of it. Commissions are just huge in this area. The commissions range from 30% to 150% of the first year's premium. So there's an immense incentive upon the insurance salesman to sell you a policy.
We really already covered this.
Yeah, so these are some of the terminology. This, from my point of view, is the most important legal document for you to have. It's called the Advanced Healthcare Directive. In some states, it's referred to as a living will. In the medical field, sometimes it's referred to as the power of attorney for medical care. But today, the legal terminology is the Advanced Healthcare Directive. And the person that you name in that Advanced Healthcare Directive is called your healthcare agent or your POA, your power of attorney for healthcare. It is, if you have signed, you almost are not going to be able to be admitted into a hospital unless you have one of these signed. They want somebody else to make the decisions as to your health care. Well, what is the two most important features of that, Leanne, as far as treating you with all medical care possible versus the other choice of comfort care?
Yeah. So if you are making decisions regarding your future and what kind of care you want towards the end of your life, as Pete's referencing, you can have the whole shebang. So you can have ventilator, feeding tubes, CPR. You're going to want to have resuscitation if your heart were to stop. Or you can say on the other side of that, that we would rather not do that. I would rather not do that. I want comfort measures. So I don't want to have all the aggressive treatment, but I want you to keep me comfortable. I want, and there's something in between too, between those two ends, to say, I want a trial period. I want a trial period of a feeding tube to see if I recover. Perhaps I've had a stroke and it's taken away my ability to swallow safely. So if that were the case, then I may say on my on my Advanced Healthcare Directive that I would like a trial period. Maybe that's 2 weeks worth of a feeding tube. If I don't recover, I don't want you to continue that.
I think what Leanne is saying is that we can't predict where we're going to be towards the end of our life, or if we get admitted to a hospital. So the Advanced Healthcare Directive, that gives another person the legal authority to make decisions on your behalf if you cannot communicate yourself, okay? Only if you can't communicate. But it doesn't go into quality of life. It doesn't go into a lot of discussions, and you need to have that with your agent and to keep that as flexible as possible so that whatever decision is made on your behalf at the time is in accordance with your own wishes. And that is not a 5-minute conversation.
It's an important piece too, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but to have an educated decision-making process. So what does it really mean to be on a ventilator? What does it really mean to have a feeding tube? What does it mean if I am 95 years old and I'm saying I want to have resuscitation if my heart were to stop? What does that mean for me? What's the implication of having CPR when I have cancer, or, you know, I'm 95, or whatever that condition is? You have to make some decisions based on facts. And I think sometimes we make decisions without really knowing the implications of the decisions that we're making.
There have been a couple of questions that have come up. One is clearly, as you pointed out, Leanne is not working for free. And so if there's a cost and you don't really have the financial resources, frequently this falls back to the family. And that's probably the reality today, that a lot of this unfortunately falls on the family. And a separate question that's come in is, if we don't have the family, then where do we go? Who do we assign? You know, does Leanne's company provide this service? Do you go to your fiduciary and say, hey, Pete, whoever it is, I want you to be my healthcare agent? Suggestions?
Yeah, it's, I don't think, Leanne, do you know if geriatric care managers will serve as the POA or the advanced care agent?
That is a very good question to ask anybody you're considering hiring, but we do not ourselves know.
Yeah, I usually hire people like Leanne to help me out in the event of that it's needed to make healthcare decisions. But yeah, private fiduciaries is probably the most common choice of a profession. You know, I've had the privilege of being with probably 50, 75 individuals during their dying process. And hospice is there. It's so, to me, it's so underutilized. And hospice is paid for by Medicare. But the problem sometimes is that your primary care physician doesn't want to let go of, or the HMO doesn't want to let go of the dollars. See, once you're 65 and you go on Medicare, there's about I think it's about $825 that automatically gets paid every single month that you're alive to your HMO. And the less they can use your services, the more money they make, okay? So, but once you go on Medicare, that $825 now goes to the hospice institution, not to the primary care physician. And sometimes the language that is used I'll give you an example. Senator McCain, when he had the brain cancer, what kind of words did the family use to keep on giving him more treatment? He's a fighter. He doesn't want to give up. I'm sorry, dying is normal. It's, you know, I don't care. You can't give up. I mean, it's not a giving up situation. And so a lot of times there are medical treatments without regard for quality of life. And I think probably Ann can talk more about that than I can.
Let me just interject one thing. There was a question of, Pete, do you have a list of private fiduciaries?
Yeah, they have a list. There's two lists available. One is for the state of California. It's called the Professional Fiduciary Bureau. And you have to click on licensees. And the higher the number, the newer the person. And you have to click on advance and then just complete Orange County. And if you then bring up the list or click on to get the list, it'll give you every single person in Orange County.
Okay.
There's another list available to you as well. And this is a professional association. It's called the Southern California or California Fiduciary Association, PFAC, PFAC. And individuals there are voluntarily put themselves on the list and are available to you.
Thank you.
And if you need individuals, recommendations, I can also give you some as well.
Okay.
You don't need an attorney to do your advanced healthcare directive. You can get one from the California Medical Association. There's the website. You can get from the Office of the Attorney General. Every hospital has an advanced healthcare directive. And again, the important thing about this document is it gives legal authority, okay, to another individual if you cannot communicate. The issue is, what do you want them to communicate? How do you want to die? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Do you want to take all means to keep you alive? Just had a discussion with a potential client, and he has what's called doomsday pills. And when he wants to end his life, he's going to take these pills. He does not want to be part of the system. I sometimes say, hey, they shoot horses, don't they? And because no court is going to pull the plug. Okay, there's a ventilator farm in San Diego that has about 70 people in there who've been living on ventilators for 10 years because either they don't have an advanced healthcare directive or the person that they named are keeping them on there. So to me, this is the most important decision that you're going to make. That you have one and who you're going to name and can they carry out your wishes. So what do you talk about? Well, this is where the Your Way booklet comes in, and you can get it for free from Help for Seniors. And when you're choosing an individual family member, I don't know if I'd do this to a friend, make sure that they understand what's important, that they understand what medical care you want, what quality of life you want. The Your Way booklet, it's not an end all, it's not a test, but it gives you a conversation. I recommend a bottle of wine that you sit down with the individual and you have a good long conversation about the end of life, what long-term care means to you, how you want me to hold your hand? I mean, I was with a Marine. He had tattoos, buffed out. And one of the questions is at the end of your life, do you want me to hold your hand? And I wanted to skip that question because I looked at him and I go, oh, I'm going to get beaten up. And he started tearing up and he says, yeah, I want you to hold my hand. So you just don't know. And you can only do it once and you want to do it well.
I think, Pete, I think that everybody got this, but choose the best person to make care decisions for you document that went out, Don?
Yes.
I think that's a really useful, to your point, Pete, about choosing the best person, because sometimes the person maybe you think of first, like your spouse, may not be the best person for you to choose as your durable power of attorney for healthcare, because they may not be able to sort of stand there and say, no, my wife or my husband would not have wanted this. They want you alive.
Yeah.
Well, possibly. They want you alive. And so you need someone who's going to be very comfortable to say, no, she would not have wanted a feeding tube inserted, or no, he would not have wanted to live for any length of time on a ventilator. You need someone who can stand up and really express your wishes clearly.
Yeah, my mother was my dad's healthcare agent, and she couldn't even stand the sight of blood, couldn't even go to the hospital. And she said whatever the doctors wanted to do. He chose the wrong individual to be his healthcare agent. So it's not that they didn't love each other, but they just, people, when you go into an attorney's office and you fill out these documents, the attorney just wants names to be put in these documents. They're not going to sit down and counsel you as to whom is the appropriate individual to make these decisions. Let's talk a little bit about the post. It's becoming more common. Leanne and I have a little difference of opinion, but let me have her give you her opinion first.
Well, my opinion is that this is a very helpful document, and it helps to clarify. It is a physician order, so it has to be followed in a medical setting. If you hit the ER and you have your pulse, they will know whether you want to be resuscitated. There's 3 different sections there. The top one is A, if you want CPR to be resuscitated. B, do you want to have full treatment, which would mean a ventilator, antibiotics, the whole shebang? Or C, artificially administered nutrition. Do you want to have a feeding tube? And that is one of the areas there, if you were to take a close look at this, that you could specify, I want a feeding tube for a trial period, as I was referencing earlier. It is a document that if you went to any facility, doesn't have to be your own hospital in your area, it could be somewhere else. Because it's a doctor's order, it needs to be followed. So if you have a faxed copy, or if you have one that's not hot pink like this one, they're all legal documents, so it can be utilized that way. But it helps to clarify, especially for someone who's in probably about a prognosis of a lifespan of 12 months or less. That's who it's appropriate for. It's not appropriate for me right now, thankfully, or Pete or Dawn here. But if someone has 1 year or less, that's someone who is appropriate for a POLS form.
And that's where we absolutely agree. It needs to be, but they're starting to use it more for individuals who are not even in a situation, who are just elderly and not even, looking at the issue of dying within the year. Whether or not you want full treatment, selective treatment, or comfort focused treatment depends on why you went into the ER to begin with. And so to make that decision in advance, I just don't understand it.
Pete,
yes.
Do you want CPR?
If
Pete, you're 71. Do you want CPR?
Depends, if I'm 95
okay. All right.
years old,
I apologize.
not.
Okay.
It's all of these situations is a depends. And I think
that's a different issue at your age.
Yeah. So for me is I want my agent for my health care to be in charge of these decisions if I can't make them myself. I don't want a physician in charge. The physicians have the primary care physicians. Most of them have 3,000 to 5,000 patients. They don't have a clue who you are. They chatted with you for 15, 20 minutes to complete this form. If you have total faith in Dr. Welby and you're lucky enough to have that primary care physician that you fully trust, I wouldn't have a problem with a POLS. But I just don't see it today in our mechanized, hurried up, legalized world where this comes out. Let's talk a little bit about hospice care.
Okay,
No. Go ahead, Leah, and then I'm going to go.
I think this comes down to education as well.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
what does it mean to, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these things, but what does it mean to be on a ventilator? What does it mean to have CPR? Those are the kinds of things you need to educate yourself on. If I have decided that I have a cancer diagnosis, I have not been well for the last few years, and I want to make sure that they do not resuscitate me, I want to make sure they do not put me on a feeding tube, and they do not maintain my life, I really want to have a POLST form filled out to guarantee through a doctor's order that they will not be doing that to me. That is not what I want.
But the doctors is supposed to listen to the agent for the healthcare when you come out of surgery as to what does this individual want. And granted, I know that the surgeon and the medical staff are much more apt to listen to a POLST document than to the agent for the healthcare.
Well, okay, to your point, if I'm going into surgery, I'm going to want to have a conversation with my durable power of attorney for healthcare before I go in there and say, this is my POLST, no matter what happens, I do not want to be resuscitated. If my heart stops during surgery, absolutely not. Just send me on my way. I'm good with that. So it comes down to having those conversations on an ongoing basis, especially if someone is ill. You want to make sure that they have things documented according to what their needs and their wishes are for themselves.
And give yourself the right to change your mind.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, because you've never been in a situation where it's life or death. And maybe at the time where that situation arises, you completely change your mind. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do.
And if you have a POLST, you can change it whenever you wish.
And it's a voluntary form. You
Absolutely.
don't have to have one of these. It's up to you.
But I find that people forget that they even signed the POLST if it's over a year. Anyway, let's.
No, we're gonna back up a couple of pages here because there was a question of how do you get a It's Your Way book. So you want to go to Help for Seniors.
Yeah, go for www.helpforseniors.org.
Right.
And you can order one online. The first one is free. The second one, I think, is $1.50 or $2.50. Well worth it. I like it better than the 5 Wishes booklet. This is much more concrete. It's a fill in the blank. It's multiple choice, and date it and sign it. And that's the important thing. But it's not a legal document, okay? This is about how you feel. And you need to review it every 3 to 5 years because as I get older, I think differently than I did 10 years ago. So, you need to keep your agent for your healthcare up to speed. And boy, do you need to know these terms. What they stand for.
This is a wonderful website. So I encourage people when you're walking through these kinds of documents that we're talking about here today, whether it's your advanced healthcare directive or you're at a stage where you want to help your loved one fill out a POLST form, the Coalition for Compassionate Care of California has some amazing tools to work through the decision-making process. They are guides. The one I threw up, this one here is what is a ventilator? And it talks about what does it really mean to be on a ventilator? When you're making a decision, whether you want one or not, especially in this time of COVID, what does it really mean to be on a ventilator? What's the long-term implication of being on a ventilator? What will my lungs look like at the end of, 6 weeks, 8 weeks on a ventilator? It's not a good
quality of life am I going to have?
Right, exactly.
Can I walk? Can I ride a bike? Can I go visit people?
Yeah.
Can I communicate?
And going back to Pete's idea about getting a bottle of wine and doing this, it really, it's not a joke, actually. I think that sitting down, having an honest conversation, we encourage when we do trainings on this and talk to our families on this, is when family comes together, it's Thanksgiving time, it's Christmas time, we're not really getting together much these days, but when we do, this is a really important conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. But I go back to what I said at the beginning, it's the biggest gift you can give your loved ones. Many times in hospice care, we find people come to the end and family doesn't know what they want. And they've had weeks and months to kind of go through this slow progression of decline. And it is heartbreaking to see families at a very stressful emotional time argue with each other, argue with their loved ones about what dad would have wanted, because dad never talked about it. And the family never said, Dad, we need to sit down and have this conversation over this big bottle of wine.
Yeah. And thinking that if you went on hospice that you're giving up. I hear that so much. Yeah. It's just unbelievable. Like dying is not normal. Right. So how can we prevent it from occurring? And there's plenty of things the medical industry can do to you to keep you breathing. You don't have to even be conscious. And so that conversation has to happen, and you are responsible for that, to have that conversation.
My wife and I had, the whole thing with COVID-19, my wife and I had one of those conversations over a good bottle of wine. And I said, never put me on a ventilator. And she said, I don't know that I can follow it. And I said, then you better hope I don't ever wake up.
Okay,
and I've noticed that she's exceptionally careful that I don't get sick.
So Dawn, let me ask you this. This is a personal question for the group here for you. Is she your power of attorney for healthcare?
Yes.
Okay, so, right? We said a little bit earlier, the spouse may not be the best person for you to have as your durable power of attorney, because they may not be able to withhold or stand up for what you decided for yourself, right?
Dawn, I could pull the plug for you in 30 seconds.
Not saying anything about your lovely wife. I'm sure she's quite lovely and very bright, but it's hard, and she may not be the right choice. Maybe it's the brother who would say, dang it, Dawn, I'm going to say whatever's on this piece of paper. I'm going to hold that up for you.
I understand.
It's hard. It's hard. It's not easy. But at least you've had the conversation, and she knows what you want.
Yeah.
And so,
well, and Leanne, to your point, in my sister's case, her husband passed away a few years ago. She has a post on her refrigerator door.
Yep.
And she is in no way terminal. She's 75. Will outlive me by 20 years probably. But she feels, because she's in Santa Barbara and I'm here, there needs to be an immediate decision.
Oh.
Therefore, here it is. Then I'm her durable power, or I'm her advanced healthcare director. And I've told her, you tell me to do this. If you want to be cryogenically frozen, I'll chop your head off and you die. Because it's what you want. It's not what I want. It's what she wants.
Boy, Dawn, that is so important. I can't stress that enough. And I see Leanne nodding her head as well. This is not about your agent for your health care. This is all about you, and can the person you name follow your wishes?
Yeah.
I had a client who named her sister, and they were devout Catholics. And she felt that she would be committing a mortal sin if she pulled the plug, because she would be the cause of her sister's death. We had to bring in the parish priest to counsel the sister that she wouldn't be committing a mortal sin. And she was on her third major relapse into cancer. So, my father was in the hospital for 6 weeks on a ventilator, begging to somebody to pull that ventilator out of his throat. And we didn't have the documentation to be able to do it. And we as a family didn't hear from my father as to what he wanted. So we were in a disarray. Mm-hmm. It almost broke up the entire family.
Yeah.
Leanne, Leanne, there's been a question. So does your company, or where would you recommend someone for training on end of life? And in a way to be clear at basic level of CPR versus ventilator, actually what all's happening? And I guess in a way, having accidentally left the slide up, is Compassionate Care California, does this website do this?
Yes.
They will provide these kinds of tools. And this was a question, I'm sorry, Don, to have someone to walk through or to talk through these kinds of decisions. Is that
yes.
What
does your company do training on this, or where can someone go?
We do training on this. And there's also You know what? If there's any way, there is something that's dinging in my brain, but it's not coming to the forefront. If that person,
That's back under the cognitive care thing. Yes.
but I can think about it, Don, and give you that information you can pass on to that person. I just can't grab it right now.
Thank you.
Council
Understood.
on Aging is excellent for that question as well.
There you go.
Compassionate care is,
Decision making? They'll walk through like this kind of decision making. How do you decide? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Well, there you go.
high cap.
Okay. I'm going to move us on.
Yes.
What's the difference between hospice and palliative? Important distinctions.
Yes. So when it wasn't that long ago, I used to present a class on hospice care, and I used to talk a lot about the word palliative. We used to talk about palliation of symptoms. But now these days, they are two separate entities, really, in a way. We now have palliative care and we now have hospice care. So both of them provide comfort measures. Both of them provide comfort for those symptoms that come towards end of life. The breathlessness, it could be pain, it could be agitation. Those kinds of things are quite common as, you know, the final months go by. But now we have a whole separate entity. In terms of palliative care, the idea is that you can still pursue acute care, you can still pursue curative care, and at the same time, they're going to be palliating symptoms or dealing with symptoms that are problematic, the nausea, the pain, etc. Hospice care, of course, in terms of prognosis, we're talking about someone who is at a prognosis of 6 months or less. We wouldn't be surprised if that person has passed away.
Greater.
Sorry?
50% chance or greater of dying in the next 6 months.
Okay.
It's a guesstimate.
So the palliative care piece, the problem with palliative care is that there's really not a great reimbursement avenue for palliative care these days. Some companies will tuck it underneath their home health benefit. Others are actually part of a Medicare program that they do receive reimbursement for their Medicare program, but there's not very many companies that have that. So just ask how it's reimbursed. But the whole thing about palliative is, again, you can pursue your acute care treatment, you can pursue aggressive curative treatment at the same time that you're getting comfort measures applied in terms of symptom management.
So hospice care is about comfort care totally.
Mm-hmm.
Not about curing you from the cancer. It's not curing you from the diabetes. It's not curing you from anything. However, we had a situation whereby individual had his cancer metastasized and went all the way into his shoulders. In order to get him comfortable, the doctor recommended radiation treatment in the shoulders to keep him comfortable. So you got treatment, but not for the purpose of curing him, of to get him more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I've had, and these the language is really important that you use with the medical folks. In Kaiser, in a situation where an individual had the MRSA germ, am I saying that correctly, Julianne?
Uh-huh.
And he had a pacemaker, and it was embedded in there, and he went into a skilled nursing facility, and it just wasn't getting cured. The infection just wouldn't go away. He had tried numerous different types of antibiotics. Nothing worked. Finally, they found one that really kept it to a minimum. The pill was $1,000 per pill, and he needed 2 of them per day.
Oh my!
At first, Kaiser refused to pay for it because they said that was curative for the infection that he had. And we argued that we don't care that it cures him. He understands that he's dying. He's comfortable with that. But nothing else is preventing him from having a fever, feeling uncomfortable, having the sweats. And this pill was doing that. And so for the purpose of comfort, Kaiser paid for the pill. So it's really important on this stuff to get to give Leanne a call, to give the Council on Aging a call. Don't accept a general answer. Explore it a little bit to see what is available. You need an advocate.
And can I just say one thing here, that when we talk about how to make decisions about end-of-life care and what it means for you, I think that if you have a physician that you feel comfortable with, I would go with maybe a POLST form or even your advanced healthcare directive. Make an appointment to talk about that specific topic. This is a doctor, hopefully, who's known you for a while and can say, you know, Mary, if you were to be kept on a ventilator, this is what that would mean for you. Or if you put down that you wanted CPR, if your heart were to stop, this is what would be your likely outcome. So I think it's really important to utilize your primary care physician as much as possible for this, because they know your clinical condition. Medicare recently, actually it wasn't that recent, maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago, they said that they would reimburse physicians for having end-of-life discussions with their patients. And I think we probably saw an uptick in the number of people who would, you know, call to have those appointments with their primary care physician. And we probably saw some physicians taking a little bit more time with their patients to have these kinds of really important discussions. So I would tap your PCP for this kind of discussion as well.
Yeah, but most physicians are just as, they're in the business of curing you. And I find very few physicians who are able to have these kinds of discussions. A book that I highly recommend is Being Mortal. I can't remember the author's name, but he's a medical doctor. And
is that Gwandi?
Yeah, something like that. Tuesdays with Maury, I find that book, make sure you have a box of Kleenex handy, but it's a short 60-page booklet, but it's just excellent in the discussion about death and dying. There's all sorts of articles today on what it's like to be on a ventilator. If you look at the statistics on CPR, you know, it's amazing how few people come out normal. So it's incumbent upon you, especially here in Southern California, where we don't like talking about death and dying or sick or, you know, people or anything like that, to get yourself knowledgeable so you can make the best decision possible, or have your agent for your healthcare make those decisions.
Okay, I'm going to stop us because it's a minute before 3. So on the screen is Pete's contact information, his email. Leanne's information is there. Obviously, all of this is in the handout material that was sent to you or would be on the website. If you have questions for either one of them, please feel free to go ahead and ask the questions of them. That's part of what we do here. So I'm going to stop sharing. And we're going to, anybody want to, either one of you want to say anything?
As far
Leanne
as
or Pete?
my screen went blank.
Perfect.
Oh,
That's the best thing we could have happen to you, because I stopped sharing. So anyway, I thank both of you very much in terms of where we are and what we did. Next week, we will talk about bonds, since we're going from death to bonds. I don't know what that means. Anyway, so I'm going to stop the recording.